First off, I just want to say thank you so much for clicking on this video. You could say this is my own Netflix special of a Netflix special. In this video, I plan to look at most of the chess positions in the Netflix show, The Queen's Gambit. First thing I want you to do is go ahead and save this video to your watch later playlist. I suggest you watch this video in several goes. It is a long video, but it is a video worth watching. Enjoy it, and I'll see you at the end of the video. In this video, we're gonna have a look at a lot of the chess positions in the Netflix special, The Queen's Gambit. Let's take it from the top. Spoilers ahead. Here in episode 1, we can see this man playing that girl. The man is Schaibel, and the girl is Elizabeth Harmon. The first ever game Elizabeth played. She had black pieces against Schaibel. e4, e5, bishop c4, knight c6 and queen f3. Queen and bishop are out. Now knight d4 looks good because it's attacking the queen and this pawn, threatening a check, attacking the king and the rook. But the problem with this move is that at least the queen takes f7 checkmate. A lot of people have fallen for this 4-move checkmate. And that is the first game that Elizabeth played. There are many ways to stop it. One way is knight f6. So then you're blocking the bishop and queen attacking the pawn. This is the next game that they play. Schaibel has white again and Elizabeth has black. e4, e6, d4 and g6. So a different setup from Elizabeth. Knight f3, queen f6. This is a common error from beginners. You get your queen out too early and your king is still in the middle. A good principle is to get your knight bishop out so then you can castle. So queen f6, an early queen move is not great. Bishop d3, so Schaibel knows what he's doing. He's going to castle next and he's got his knight and bishop out. But also he's got 2 pawns in the center. And here black played bishop g7. e5 is guarded by this pawn and white is now able to make a great move because black will not be able to hide on e7 or d8. So here, pause the video. I'll give you 5 seconds. Can you find a great move for white, just winning the queen straight away? The move is bishop g5 and here the queen has run out of squares. The next key moment in episode 1 is when Schaibel tells Elizabeth to learn the Sicilian. So we have e4 and not e5 this time but c5. And he tells her to learn 2 variations of the Sicilian, the Najdorf and the Levenfish. So let's quickly check that out now. Knight f3, d6, and now white gets a pawn in the center. The point is after a pair of pawns come off, take, now white has a knight in the center. Knight f6, black attacks the pawn in the middle and white will just defend with knight c3. And here we have g6 first. This is the Sicilian dragon. I don't think this is mentioned in episode 1, but the next move makes it the Levenfish, where white has 2 pawns in the center. This can also happen after a6, which also Schaibel mentioned. This is the Najdorf. Pawn here to guard the b5 square. Later also black can get space on this side of the board, the queen side, and f4 is still a move here. Now normally here black can react in the center. White has 2 pawns, so why not black can get his fair share of the center with 2 pawns himself in the center. Next game, Elizabeth now takes on the school teacher for the junior school, for the older school, and in that game is a very nice miniature. That is a very short game leading to checkmate. Knight f3, f5. So this is the Reti opening, but the school teacher plays f5. This is the Dutch defense. Now Elizabeth plays a very, very sharp line. That's why already when I'm watching this, I'm just so impressed by the research that has gone behind this show. e4, take, and now knight e5. Black can play d5 to protect the pawn. Not the best move, but let's see what happens. d3, this is the idea. Now, you may be asking, white has just chucked a pawn. You've played e4, you've put your knight in the middle, so what? You're down a pawn. But the point is, after black takes and takes, we've got a knight and bishop in the middle, and this king is feeling a draft. Notice this king cannot actually escape to d7 or to f7. Knight c6 was played by the school teacher, and now checkmate in 3 moves, as Elizabeth mentioned. Queen h5 check. If that pawn wasn't there, it's checkmate. So the only good move is to block, and then she just finished it off. Bishop takes g6 check, take, and queen takes g6, checkmate. If you want to show off a little bit, you can, because you can actually sacrifice your queen. Not shown in episode 1, because after take, it's actually a checkmate with the bishop. The point is, this king cannot go to d7 or to f7, guarded by the knight on e5, and that is checkmate. The best game in this episode is a very famous game. That's why I'm even more impressed as I continue to watch episode 1 of the Queen's Gambit. Elizabeth takes on the school teacher again. e4, c6, d4, d5. This game is so famous, it's so beautiful because the checkmate is so rare. This is the Caro-Kann defense. Black gets 2 pawns in the center, just like white, but the point is, why put a pawn here? Because if white takes, then you can take back with that pawn. You've got backup. Elizabeth plays knight c3 to defend your center. School teacher takes, knight f6, and Elizabeth plays queen d3. But knight takes f6 check is actually a very trendy move nowadays, because after take, black has 4 pawns in front of his king. He's going to castle. This bishop is going to come to d6. And I cover a very famous game because Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, lost for the first time in over 2 years, the first time since 31st of July 2018. So I'm going to link that game in the description below and in the top right corner of this video. You can check it out later. Now, after knight f6, queen d3 played, and e5, striking the center. This move doesn't look that great because it looks like it chucks a pawn, and when I saw this position on the board, I'm already hooked to this series, Queen's Gambit on Netflix, because this game is so famous and I just haven't seen it for a long time, and the research that is going into this show has been amazing so far. And guess what, it's only episode 1. e5, take, queen a5 check, because you got to get your pawn back. Bishop d2, queen takes e5, and it looks like there is a big problem for white because the queen and the knight are attacking white's knight. So you've got 2 attacking this, but white only has a defender. But here, Elizabeth plays the brilliant move castle. Now, it looks like the knight is going to fall. But if you saw episode 1, this is not a spoiler, but if you haven't and you are new to chess, just pause the video and find the brilliant tactic for white, and I'll give you a clue. The brilliant move is also the move that looks like it's the worst possible move. And sometimes that's why tactics can be so beautiful in chess. They just look so bad, they are so good, they look like they're losing, but they are winning. So pause the video, I will give you 5 seconds. Play the worst possible move. The winning move here is queen d8 check. Simply brilliant. They are following a famous game, Richard Reti against Vasily Tartakower. Queen d8 check. The worst move on the board. It looks like you've just chucked your queen. But the follow-up is brilliant. Bishop g5, double check. That's why this works. You cannot take the bishop, because even though the bishop is taking the king and it looks like the queen and knight can take it, the rook is also checking. When there is a double check, you can only deal with the king's situation. You can't block this check because that's giving check. You can't block this check because the bishop is checking. So after bishop g5 check, there's only one move. The king has to move to c7 or to e8. If king e8, then we throw the rook in. Checkmate. rook is protected by the bishop, the king cannot go forward because of the bishop. Now the other direction is simply more beautiful. After bishop g5 double check, king c7, and here checkmate in one move. There's only one check, and this is beautiful. Bishop d8 check. Wow. The king cannot take the bishop because of the rook. The king cannot go here or there because of the rook, and the king cannot come out because the bishop is really guarding the b6 square as well. And the king cannot go back anywhere because it's just being blocked in by its own pieces. So I am already hooked to this show. What an example to display in episode 1. Queens Gambit episode 2. This is a game between two players, not involving Beth Harmon. But here we're about to see a typical tactic which beginners can fall for because they're not taking care of their king. In this position, white's move, he took. Black takes. Now white takes, trading off knight, and then queen takes knight. Here white is winning. A queen each, but white has a rook and black doesn't. And now the point is, the king is not safe because no pawn has been pushed. That's why in this position white is completely winning after rook d1. Wherever the queen goes, rook d8 will be checkmate. So if queen e5, rook d8, mate. In this position, Beth has white against someone in the tournament. Her opponent has now played bishop takes g4. And Beth Harmon now goes for a really nice tactic, a very nice queen sacrifice, beginning with queen takes g4. After queen takes g4, black fell for it. Black actually took on g4, allowing a very nice checkmate, beginning with bishop e5 check. And the reason this works is because both bishops are slicing the board. The king can't move to g7 or to g8, and the only move is to delay it by playing queen f6 or even tucking the rook back. So queen f6 was shown in the episode, bishop takes f6 check. Still, the bishop sliced the board. Only one move, and then here it is checkmate. I think in the episode the guy resigned, but it's a very nice double bishop checkmate by Harmon. Harmon has won all her games so far in this tournament, and now she's taking on Towns. In this position she has black and she is winning. She's got an extra knight. A very useful pawn. If this pawn drops, then the plan is just to march this pawn up the board, get a queen. In the episode, king g6 was played, and then Towns said, "Easy Harmon, you are humiliating my rook." And here, Towns puts his rook on the worst possible square, which is swinging the rook all the way to a5. So pause the video if you want. Can you find the winning move for black? I'll give you 5 seconds. This is the worst possible square because now the king and rook can get forked with the knight. Knight b3 check wins. The king has to move. You can never block a knight check, and after the king moves anywhere, then the rook drops, and then black is completely winning. You've got an extra knight and a rook, and here Towns resigned. This is the middle game position you see. It's the final of the tournament, and Harmon is now taking on the favourite, Beltik. We get this middle game, but you also get the scene where they actually play out the opening moves, and I thought that was really good. Because how do you get this position is very interesting for a chess player like myself, and you see the opening being played out, and this was a Caro-Kann defense. e4 c6, knight f3 d5, and knight c3 by Harmon. Beltik goes bishop g4, and after h3 gives up the bishop pair, but then we get this triangle pawn chain in the center. Very solid way to play, and by solid I mean it's very difficult to break up this central chain. So this is a good setup. It's like you deliberately get rid of your bishop and then you form a triangle in the middle. I discovered this game thanks to a nice feature on Chess24. You can insert this position onto a board, and then I went down to the database section and I found out this was a famous game between Nezhmetdinov and Kasparian. So we have this very interesting middle game position, and now we will go to the very end, where Harmon unleashes a wonderful winning tactic. So we'll go to the key point, which is this. Rook h8 check. Beltik is checking Harmon's king. So Harmon blocks with the bishop, and now Beltik grabs a pawn, which looks okay, but this is the trap Harmon was setting up. Knight takes g6, and a wonderful checkmating pattern coming up. Rook f7 check. This move looks very dangerous, but maybe Beltik was just thinking, you just get the king out the way. And now pause the video. Can you find the brilliant move? If you've seen episode 2, then this move may not be a surprise. Pause the video. Can you find the first move? And we will go through this wonderful sacrifice. The winning move is queen takes g6 check, and Kasparian resigned, or here Beltik resigned. A queen sacrifice, because after take you get the rook in check. All the red arrows are showing the squares the king cannot go to, so the king can only come forward or to the side, g5 or h5. So if we go up, rook f5 check, let's follow the king, king back, rook f6 check. King has to go back, let's say to g7, and now rook g5 check. So the white rooks are covering the entire f and g file. And also the rook on f6 is covering the h6 square, so there's only one square for the king, king h7. That's why this checkmate is so beautiful, because this rook used to be doing something. It used to attack the white king, but now it's being blocked by its own king, and that's why the final move is wonderful. You can actually now move your bishop, but before you couldn't move the bishop. So bishop f5 checkmate, all squares covered. You can't go to g8 because of this rook. You can't go here, same thing. You can't come forward because of this. You can't go here because all free, and you are being checked. You can't go back, there's a rook in the way. Checkmate, and then Harmon won this tournament, beating Beltik in the final. Episode 3 of the Queen's Gambit. Beth is taking part in another tournament. In this position, she has black. A nice tactic here to win the game in one move. Notice white's king is on e3. There's a bishop indirectly pointing at the king, but at the moment there is a knight in the way. So pause the video. Can you find a really good knight move? The knight gets out the way, and then it will be a devastating check. I will give you 5 seconds. Not only can we move the knight out of the way, but we can capture a piece as well. So knight takes e2, check. So this is a discovered check from the bishop on h6. In episode 3, her opponent resigned. Because if you take the knight, then it is checkmate in one move. Notice here, all the squares covered. That square is covered by this pawn. This square and this square covered by the rook. This square covered by the bishop. White has pieces on the back blocking him going backwards, and it looks like this is the only square not covered. But black now throws in rook d2 checkmate, because now this rook covers this square, and here white cannot move anywhere. Checkmate. Still in episode 3, we are in Las Vegas, 1966. Harmon plays Benny Watts. Let's go through the final position. This is Beth Harmon against Benny Watts. Benny has the black pieces, and here he played rook h2. This is a great move because now we have a rook and a bishop attacking the knight, and at the moment there's only a rook defending it. Here Beth played king f2, and here, pause the video, can you find the winning move, which led to Beth resigning. This is called a fork. This is where you attack 2 pieces at the same time. I'll give you 5 seconds. The king is now on f2, but the rook is on a clumsy square, allowing knight d3 check. And here, in the episode, Beth resigned, and Benny Watts won the championship. This is called a fork. The king and rook can both be attacked at the same time. Knight d3 check played. After the king moves, then you are just gonna lose a rook. Now here, you can take, but then your knight will drop. And in this position, black is winning because black has an extra rook. Benny Watts wins this tournament. Later on in the show, they will meet again. Beth has white and has a dominating position. She is on board 4, so she's making her way up to board 1 very soon. Beth has just played d7, and black now has to play rook d8, or else white is just going to get a queen. In this position, there's a very nice checkmating pattern. It is checkmate in 3 moves. This bishop is so strong, but it's time to get rid of it, clear the path. So the first move is bishop takes rook. Bishop takes bishop, and now time to get the queen into the game with queen h6 check. And already this is just looking so dangerous. Black can block with the bishop. Black now only has 1 square for the king to escape to, which is e7. So checkmate in 1 move. White now swings the queen over to d6, and that is a really nice checkmate. All squares covered. e8 is covered by the pawn. This g8 square is covered by the bishop. After queen h6 check, maybe the king could escape, but it leads to checkmate as well. We'll go queen h7 check. The king can only go back. And now checkmate in 1 move, queen f7. This is a good pattern to remember. The queen is directly opposite the king. When this happens, it doesn't really matter what is protecting the white queen. It can be any piece. It's really one of the first checkmating patterns you learn. Queen opposite king, anything protects the queen, and that is checkmate. So Beth wins this game. Beth is now on board 3. She has the white pieces, and in this position, she is completely winning. One reason that she's completely winning is because black has no pawns in front of his king. But notice, white has 3 pawns. So there is protection for white. Also, white has so many pieces around the king. When we're thinking about attacking, it's good to think of the rule of 3. So if you have 3 pieces near your opponent's king, then it is a good chance for you to generate an attack. White has 3 to 4 pieces. Black only has 1 defender here. Also, black's pieces are not so well placed. This queen, it is attacking this pawn, defended by the king. It's also attacking this one. This rook isn't actually doing too good a job because it cannot check the king because there's a bishop here. White to move and checkmate in 2 moves. I'll give you 5 seconds. The winning move is queen f7 check. The king has to go to h8 or to h7. It can't go here. So wherever the king goes, it doesn't matter. The next move will be the same. You're going to take the bishop. And just like before, we have this pattern. The first checkmate pattern that you will learn. You put the queen opposite the king, and as long as you have something defending it, then it is checkmate. Here you have a rook. So Beth Harmon wins on board 3, moving up the tournament. Beth now has the black pieces and she has a winning endgame. So let's just see how this could have played out. In this position, it's white's move, and white played rook a4, which looks like a good move because if rook takes d6, then rook takes a7, and even though it looks like black is winning, 2 rooks against a rook and a bishop, white does have an a-pawn. This can be very difficult to win. So Beth plays a really good move. After rook a4, you don't take this pawn yet, because this pawn is a goner. In the episode, we can see Rook b8 being played, which is a very accurate move. Here the scene ends, but the reason this is such a good move is because Beth is going to play Rook to b6, then use the Rook here to take this. Now why is that important? Because then this Rook still keeps an eye on this pawn. Black wants to keep his A pawn on the board to retain winning chances. So after Rook b8, the scene ends, but I just want to show you how this game could continue. By the way, bishop g4 doesn't work. You may be thinking, if Rook d6, Rook a7. But the point is, black can block the bishop. The bishop goes back, and then Rook b6. So Rook b8, maybe white can get the king in, or white can push. Doesn't matter too much. Maybe h5, you can go king g7, take, maybe king f1, rook b6, king e2, and now rook d6. And here, black is winning. Black has a rook for a bishop, and at the highest level, black can win this. Next up, Beth takes on Georgi Girev. I was very impressed by the scene in episode 4 because you can see both players playing out the moves. They are all proper moves in a proper opening. The Sicilian variation, we have the open Sicilian, and I just want to show you a few scenes. Here you can see Georgi Girev sitting down, introducing himself to Beth Harmon. A nice scene here where they've played the opening moves, and we can see this on the board shortly. In this next moment, Georgi says it's time to adjourn. We have this endgame where there's so many pawns for both sides, a bishop and a rook each, but black's king, so Georgi Girev's king, is not as safe, and it's time for Beth Harmon to seal her move. That means the game has been going on for so long, it's time to put an end to the game. Beth seals her move, puts her move in an envelope, then gives it to the arbiter, and they resume the game the next day. And this is that very scene. Pawn to h5 has just been played, and it is a brilliant move. The amazing thing is this game was taken from Yakovenko versus Stelvagen. So it's a proper game, but in the game by Yakovenko, h5 was not played. So in the Netflix episode, an improvement was shown. That's why I'm just so impressed by the chess moves in the Queen's Gambit. So let's take it from here. We have this position, Queen d2. Let's run through the opening moves, just like that which was shown in the episode. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4. We have the open Sicilian take. Georgi gets his knight out, knight c3, d6. Bishop to e3, knight f6 and f4. Georgi strikes in the center with e5, and after knight f3, knight g4. Attacking the bishop, so Beth defends the bishop, take, and central pawn trade, take. 5 hours later, we get this endgame, and that's what I want to discuss now. King h8 played, Beth has just sealed her move, they resume the next day. And in this position, white plays a brilliant move. Notice this pawn on g5 needs to be protected by the pawn on h4. Or does it? Beth now plays h5, breaking through. So we have this tension on the king side. This beautiful square of pawns, this symmetry where if you take me, I will take you. But if you take me the other way, I will take you the other way. So let's see how this happens. h5, a brilliant breakthrough. First example, if g takes h5, then g6, and black is losing. The point of g6 is now this rook can go to h7 and it will be checkmate. This bishop is guarding the g8 square. The only move is bishop g7, stopping checkmate, as the rook can no longer get to h7, but now rook c8 check, and the king is in trouble. You have to block with the bishop, and after take, white is a bishop up. Instead of capturing this way, the other way was to play h takes g5. So like I said before, if you take me this way, I will take you the other way. H takes g6. This now once again, threatens mate on h7. By the way, you can't play rook h1, stopping mate because there's a bishop here. Taking the rook. So we block again with bishop g7, only move, and then rook c8 check will win the bishop. Black has to block once again, and then you can take it. So I'm looking at this position in chess 24, and the best move by black is actually to play rook e2, threatening rook takes b2 check, and here white can just take a move out and play the calm a4. Wow. Rook takes b2 check, king can go up, and still we have this square of tension on the king side. If black doesn't do anything, white's going to take a pawn anyway. So he takes, and now there's a difference. White is going to play rook h7 mate, but black can now swing the rook to h2. And I believe we see this in the episode. I was trying to make out the moves. I feel like I did a good job, because a scene coming up is when all the pawns come off. The rook on c7 is doing a great job, so now Beth just takes Georgi's pawns. Rook takes pawn, rook h6, going after that very dangerous pawn. Now take, and then take. White is completely winning here because white has two passed pawns on the queen side. These pawns are called runners. You're just going to run them up the board, uncontested by any black pawn. a5, b5 check, king a4 check, king b3, check, king c2, something like this. We have this final scene, as you can see here. White has the passed pawns a and b, and Georgi resigned. Borgov versus Harmon, they finally play each other. And I'm really pleased because I managed to stick this position on the Chess 24 database, and they are following a real game. As the game goes on, we get to this final position where Borgov is completely winning against Harmon, and after queen f3, Harmon resigned. So let's go through this game now. We'll take it from the top, and then we will jump to a very key moment of this game. So this is Borgov against Harmon. e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. In the episode, it's mentioned as a Rossolimo Sicilian. This is the bishop b5 Sicilian, rather than a very popular way to play, which is d4. This is called the open Sicilian because a pair of pawns get traded off. Borgov goes for bishop b5. We have queen b6, and then now let's jump to the end. I want to take it from this point. Here Borgov has a really nice position. I know this isn't mentioned in the episode, but I just want to show you how Borgov breaks through, and then we get to that scene. The king is in the middle. Harmon's king is in the middle, so Borgov strikes in the center with e5, opening up the e-file, because if this rook faces the king, it's going to be checkmate very soon. Also, the queen is attacking e7, but the queen also defends f2. This is the sign of a good piece. It's got two functions. It attacks and defends. D takes e5, rook takes e5, threatening checkmate on e7. So if it is white's move, then queen takes e7 will be checkmate. Rook b1 check, and Borgov. Also Leonard Stein, because we are following the game Leonard Stein against Matanovic back in 1965. Borgov plays king h2, a fancy move because you can't play rook takes rook because queen takes pawn is checkmate. That's why Borgov can just put his king to the side. f6. And now comes a really cool move. Isn't shown in the episode, but I just wanted to show you. This is a brilliant move with d6. It just looks amazing because even though black has played this move, stopping the queen attacking e7, white now goes d6. So then white has d6 and the rook attacking e7. So a really cool move. You can't play pawn takes rook because this is mate. That's why d6 is a brilliant move. So after d6, Beth Harmon gets her king out of the way, rook takes e7 check, king c6. Borgov now trades the rooks and takes on f6, and here white is completely winning. In the episode, we see the queen on b8, attacking the pawn on d6, so rook c7 check, king b6, and after queen f3, Leonard Stein beat Matanovic. Borgov beat Harmon in their first ever encounter. Queen f3, white is completely winning. White is going to play queen coming into c6, and it'll be checkmate very soon. So here, Beth Harmon resigned. Episode 5 of the Queen's Gambit. Let's take it from here. This is a sad scene. Beth Harmon has been working with Harmon-Beltik. They've been living together, working together, preparing Beth for her next tournament. But in this scene, we can actually see that, well, Beltik is not going to be a professional chess player. He's going to go to a university to study engineering, I believe. And in this scene, Beltik said to Harmon that, "You helped me realize something." And Beltik says that I don't love chess, and that is okay. You know what? That is okay. Chess can be an important part of life, but it's not the only thing in life. Beltik realizes that because Harmon is just levels above him. So this was a nice, sad scene. It's like a happy, sad scene. Even though Beltik is not going to go on to be a pro chess player, he will go on to study engineering at university, exploring a new career path. Here we have Beth, Harmon and Benny Watts standing in front of the US Championships. It's round 1, and we're going to have a look at a couple of very quick tactics which saw both Benny and Beth win their first round games. Let's start with Benny Watts' game. In this position, his opponent played Queen D2, attacking the knight, but this loses immediately. The knight is attacking G2 H3 near the king, so now black just gets another piece near the king. Black is now threatening checkmate. And here the game is over. G3 played to stop checkmate, but now knight takes H3 check. Knight attacks king, but now the queen attacks the queen. So in the episode we see it being played out. King moves and then Benny took the guy's queen. And the guy resigned. This is Beth's first game of the US Championships. It's black to move and black is down a knight. Black has a king here defending this pawn, but white is attacking his pawn. So black now can play king a6, leaving this pawn unguarded. Now after king a6, white didn't go for this. Beth retreated the knight and played knight to b3. And then all of black's pawns dropped. The king has to move somewhere, doesn't matter, but then you take, and then you can take this pawn. I think this endgame is really, really clever because there is a subtlety, which is what I care about when I'm looking at these chess positions. After king a6, I think if you play knight takes c6, I wonder if this blows the game. And it does, amazing. It just goes to show how impressive the research is, because after knight takes c6, it does look like white has blown it. This is now a draw. b3 is such a problem. You have to take the pawn, and king b5, black actually saves this game, wow. Because both the knight and the pawn are being attacked. You cannot save both at the same time. So if you save the knight, the pawn drops. So here the best move is actually just to give yourself up. And with this endgame it is a draw, but Beth Harmon is accurate till the end, and so are the researchers in this show. Amazing. King a6, you play knight b3, game over. Wherever the king moves, you can take with the knight, take with the king as well. And then we're good. Because the king is just going to close in. We're going to go after this pawn. King e5, king e7, we can play knight d4, ganging up against this pawn, and king f6. White king controls d square. This king, it just has to give room. That's why this endgame is completely lost. The king now comes in. The king now comes in and the pawn drops, and then this pawn, we're just going to run it down the board. Let's say king here, king here, and now d6 push. Game over. Getting a queen. Here Beth is in the cafeteria about to play Benny Watts at speed chess. The best position, the best tactic is here. They played so many times and Benny ended up winning all the games. And they were playing for $5 per game. Here you can see both players deep in focus, and we're going to go through the final combination of this blitz game now. Here Benny has white against Beth, and white is completely winning because black's king is not safe. White has two attackers at the moment, the knight and the rook, and sometimes that is all you need. A queen trade is seen in the episode. Queen takes queen, rook takes rook, and then Benny moves his rook all the way up the board, and that is checkmate. Sometimes all you need is two attackers. This is checkmate because black has his own pawn blocking his own king. A nice checkmating pattern with knight and rook. By the way, at the end, they met in the final. Benny had white, he played the English, and then Harmon ended up beating him in 13 moves. We did not get a chance to see this game in this episode. The scene just cuts and then both of them are in the bar, just discussing their game. This tends to happen in tournaments. After a game, you might grab a drink together, just discuss the game and play through it. It can be a nice atmosphere after a game. So that's what happens, and then on to episode 6. Episode 6 of the Queen's Gambit. Here we see Beth taking on Benny and two of his friends. They're playing in Benny's place and they're playing speed chess. So let's check out a couple of these positions. First up, it is white to move here and win. Black's king is not safe. Even though black has 3 pawns in front of his king, he is missing a bishop, normally on this square. Because if there was a bishop on g7, then this queen would not be allowed on h6. Pause the video. Can you find a brilliant move for white, which was played in the episode, leading to checkmate in 3 moves? I'll give you 5 seconds. The move is knight h5, or knight f5, same thing. The point is, if black does nothing, then queen g7 will be checkmate. In the episode, we see Benny take the knight, and now it's time to swing the rook over. Rook g3 check, the king can only go in the corner, and then queen g7 check, as played in the episode by Beth. And here we see Beth beating all 3 players all the time in speed chess, which contrasts to what we saw before in the previous episode, where Benny kept beating Beth and winning $5. But here, Beth was actually playing for $10 per game and beat them all the time. Here is another blitz game played between Beth and Benny, and this is a very famous game. Let's take it from this position. This is between Paul Morphy and Isouard, back in Paris, 1858. Here it is white to move. Black's king is still in the middle. Black has not got his bishop and rook out. At the moment, the queens attack each other. But here, Beth, or Paul Morphy, unleashes a winning combination. Checkmate in 2 moves. So once again, I'm very impressed that they got a very famous game and put it in a show. Pause the video to have a go. I'll give you 5 seconds. It would be really nice if rook d8 was possible. This is a very similar checkmate that we saw in the first episode, where there's a bishop on g5, there's a rook on d1. This was when Beth checkmated the high school chess teacher, Mr Ganz. Here, white to move, time to sacrifice your queen. Queen to b8 check, the king cannot move, so the knight takes it, vacating the d file, and then rook d8 is mate. You can't take the rook because of the bishop, and you can't come forward because of the bishop. Here is an endgame puzzle posed by one of Benny's friends when they came over for blitz, for speed chess. It is white to move and checkmate in 3. Now, a lot of chess players like these kind of puzzles because they require an unusual motif, an unusual idea. So let's check out this endgame now. White to move, checkmate in 3. First thing to notice is the king is boxed in, there's a bishop here, deliberately, so then the king cannot go into the corner, or else it might not be checkmate in 3. Another thing to notice is white is completely winning because white has 2 extra knights. But it's because it is mate in 3 that it is a very nice sequence of moves. So pause the video, can you see the first move? I'll give you 5 seconds. The first move is king d7. At the moment, the king cannot go here, to e5, to the sides. It can only go to one square on g7. So if the king moves, first thing I want to show is if bishop g7, then you're just boxing your own king in. Now time to bring the knight in. And it doesn't matter where the bishop goes, we're going to play the same move. So if we put the bishop here, knight e8 check, that's the point. The knight checks the king, but it guards the g7 square. And here the king cannot move anywhere, so that is really nice. The difficult one to see is if the king moves. Now we still move the knight to d6 because it's got two options, knight e8 checkmate or knight takes f5 checkmate. And knight takes f5, that was the one I did not see. Now here the king can move to h6 or to f8. If it goes to f8, then we actually bring the other knight in, which is really nice. Checking the king, guarding this square, and notice this protects this bishop. And the other option is if you go king h6, now you play knight takes pawn checkmate. Every square is guarded. g7 is guarded by the knight. Both green squares are guarded by the bishop, and the king cannot go back to h7 because of the other knight on g5. So a really nice study-like checkmate. It is Paris, 1967. Just want to show you some of the incredible scenes in the game between Beth Harmon and Vasily Borgov. This is the demonstration board. We see a Najdorf, an open Sicilian Najdorf. Then we see this middle game, and this is taken from an actual game between Megaranto and Dominguez. Then we get this position. Black's pieces are all superior to White's pieces. Black has two bishops slicing the board. Bishop is putting pressure on f4. This bishop controls so many light squares. Black's queen is more active than White's queen. Black's queen is at the moment pinning this knight to the king, so then White cannot take the knight. And also, this rook is better than this. This rook is controlling lots of squares on the third rank, putting pressure on h3. Here, Beth played queen d4, offering a trade of queens. This tends to be a good strategy when you know one of your pieces is worse than your opponent's, so you offer a trade. Here, the scene cuts and then we jump straight to an endgame. But, for example, some moves like this could have happened. Black can take. The queens come off, and here, black is much better. Yes, White has an outside pass pawn, but this pawn isn't moving anywhere anytime soon. This bishop is controlling the queening square, and both of Black's pieces, both of Black's minor pieces are better than both of White's. Also, at the moment, Black has 4 against 2 on the king side. This is known as a kingside majority. Now we're going to jump straight to the final scene. The final moment of this game. Here we see Borgov making the final move against Beth. Let's quickly check out the final moments now. When you look at this position, White is completely lost because White is down a queen. Also throughout this game, Beth has been drunk, drinking lots of water during the game, so she hasn't played her best game. In the episode, we see Beth moving. We see Beth swinging the rook over, and this move does have a point because if it's White's move again, then it will be checkmate. But the problem is, it is Black's move. Borgov looks up to Beth, which is one funny thing about this show. There's just so much. I would say there's a bit too much eye contact. Here, checkmate in one move. Queen h4, it's game over. The king has nowhere to go. All squares covered. g6 is covered by the pawn or the bishop. The queen cannot be taken due to the rook, and this king cannot go anywhere. Blocked in by the bishop, it cannot go back, cannot go forward because of the queen, to the side or back, or due to the queen. Episode 7 of the Queen's Gambit. We are in Moscow, 1968. Beth is gonna take on the Soviets. the Russians. This is one funny thing that kept happening in episode 7. Whenever Beth won a game, the arbiter shook her hand. Now, this tends to happen in high-level tournaments. After a game is over, the arbiter can come round, collect the score sheets, or you hand in the score sheets yourself, and then the arbiter might shake your hand. But not after every game. Maybe the arbiter shakes your hand if you've won the tournament. So we've got a couple of scenes here where the arbiter might even be getting a little bored, always shaking Beth Harmon's hands because she keeps winning. And here we see the 2 big games of episode 7. Here we can see the start of Luchenko against Beth. Let's take it from this position. Luchenko against Beth Harmon. White has just played f3. And let's consider each piece before finding out what black does. Black's bishop is better than white. When this rook gets out of the way, this bishop is going to control lots of dark squares around the white king. But this bishop is something I like to call it's an empty bishop. You're controlling lots of squares, but none of these squares really matter. Let's talk about the major pieces, the 2 rooks and the queen. Black is trying to create some sort of attack. Maybe black's going to swing the rook to g7 or to f7. Whereas white is using his major pieces. At the moment, the queen is defending this pawn. Maybe the rooks are going to shuffle over to defend. But black's rooks are better than white's rooks. Pawn structure. King safety. White has 3 pawns, black has 2. So they both look relatively safe. Until now. In comes Garry Kasparov's analysis. Black now played the incredible h5, which looks terrible because of the pin on the d3 h7 diagonal. It looks like white can just take, but now black plays a brilliant move. Good luck finding this. King out the way, deliberately giving up 2 kingside pawns. I've never ever seen this idea before. So unusual to give up 2 of your own kingside pawns to create an attack. White now takes with the pawn. Rook takes h4, vacating the f4 square so then the queen could come in. Also rook h2 check is now a threat. So white now goes rook h1 and pause the video and good luck. Can you find a ridiculous way to keep the attack going by opening up the g file, by playing a move that looks like it's going to open up the g file? I will give you 5 seconds. The move is rook h7. Never have I ever seen a move like this, where you put a rook on this square, white can just take it, but it's losing. So first question must be, if you take the rook, the g file opens. Black has another major piece, the queen. To g7, check. The king has to move, and it's game over because white cannot move the king anywhere, so then it still protects the rook on h1. So king f1, rook takes h1 check, king f2, and checkmate in one move. Shove the queen right down to g1. So then the king cannot escape to e3. Queen g1 is checkmate. All squares covered. Back to the episode after rook h7 played. Luchenko now goes rook g1. Beth now plays rook h5. Options, rook h2 check is still there. The bishop on e5 still controls lots of dark squares, but now black can swing the rook over to g5 to check the king. King f1, white now has a threat, playing g7 check, winning the queen. Well, not quite winning the queen because we have a bishop here, but disturbing the black attack. So Beth now goes king g7. And all the options are still there. Rook f5, so then you can take on f3 with check. White now plays bishop d7, rook d4, swinging the rook over. The queen needs to protect f3, so it goes to e3. The reason is black's queen is attacking f3, so white queen to e3. Now Beth plays rook d1, check. Luchenko offers a trade, and now pause the video. Can you find the winning move for black? And the clue is you do not move the rook on d1. So, I'll give you 5 seconds. If you do not move the rook, you've got to attack something more valuable, so it has to be attacking the queen. Bishop d4, and this is game over. Here, Luchenko resigned. If you get the queen out the way, first thing I want to say is queen e7 check doesn't work, offering a queen trade, because you can just take it. White cannot play rook takes because it's illegal. Black has his rook, pinning white's rook to the king. If the queen moves back, then we can swap off rooks, and then there are 2 options. If the king takes, you can play rook e5, winning the queen, or you can take the rook on g1. After bishop d4, if queen e2, if rook takes e1 check, if white now takes with the queen, then black can get the queen in. Queen takes f3 check, and it'll be checkmate in 2 moves. You have to block, and then you can take with mate. This game was taken from a real game, Arshak Petrosian against Vladimir Akopian, back in the 1980s. In this game we got to see the sheer power of Garry Kasparov's analysis. Here are some really nice scenes I want to talk about after the game. Luchenko's just resigned, and here Beth says, "I played your game since I was a small girl." As a chess player, I've also done this. You play through the games of players, of masters who are better than you. Luchenko then says, "I went over your games at this tournament." This tends to happen when you're preparing against someone. The most important games tend to be their most recent ones. So you get, let's say, a database, you download the games from the rounds, if they've been put online, and you go through those recent games. So that's what Luchenko did, and that's what players normally do when they're in a tournament. Here I want to end the Luchenko part with this. I may have just played the best chess player of my life. What a nice thing for Luchenko to say to Beth Harmon. And then here it's just such a nice reaction. You can see Beth crying here as she's just beaten a top Russian player. What a very, very nice scene. The final game against Borgov. Beth Harmon has white, Vasily Borgov has black. d4, d5, c4. Here we get the name of the show, the Queen's Gambit. White offers a pawn on move 2. Black can take it, that's called the Queen's Gambit accepted. Then white might go e4, trying to get the center, trying to get the pawn back. But black can play moves like knight f6 to attack the center. Black can play e5 to strike in the center. This is the Queen's Gambit accepted. A good move nowadays is e6. This is the Queen's Gambit declined. You don't take white's pawn, you build your own pawn center. You've got 2 pawns in the center, so does white. And one more option, another great move here is c6. This is the Slav defense. Once again, both sides have 2 pawns in the center. So we have d4, d5, c4. Now we're going to jump straight to the adjournment point. h3. This is the game Vasily Ivanchuk versus Patrick Wolf back in 1993. h3 played and Borgov says adjournment. That means this game is going to resume tomorrow. A good strategy to adjourn when you have an easy move to make. Here, black is just going to retreat the queen. Queen g6. And here, both teams get working. Beth has a team led by Benny. Really nice scene where Benny phones Beth up, giving her variations along with all the friends we have seen throughout the show. Very, very nice, heartwarming scene to show that there are a team of people behind you who want you to succeed. After Queen g6, let's discuss this position. Firstly, let's look at the minor pieces. White has 2 knights bishop, black has 2 bishops and a knight. White's minor pieces are better. White has a very strong knight on f5. near the king. White has a knight on c5, planning to come into e6. So white's minor pieces are better. Let's have a look at the rooks. White has a rook on the f file, black has a rook on the a file. White's rook is better. White's rook is closer to the king once the knight moves out of the way. Also, at the moment, this rook is supporting the knight on f5. The queens. Queen on d3, queen on g6. This queen is defending e4 because black has a knight attacking it. This queen is still facing the king. Maybe if the knight moves to h5, then to f4. Then the queen on g6 stands well. And one more thing to discuss is the pawn structure. At the moment, it is static. There are no pawn breaks for either side. Both kings look quite safe. The game continued the next day, and Beth played knight e6. Now we're deviating from the real game, Ivan Chuk against Wolf. Knight e6 played. Rook a4. Vasily goes after the e4 pawn, and Beth invites Borgov in. b3, attacking the rook. If the rook doesn't take on e4, it's just a waste of time. So rook takes e4, and now knight takes d6. Things get sharp very fast, very tactical. Knight takes d6 has a clear point. If you take this knight, which is the wrong knight to capture, knight f8 check is going to pick up the queen. Forking the king and queen. So after knight takes d6, both knights look so dangerous at the moment. Black now takes the knight on e6, which we see being played out in episode 7. Take, take. White now has a very dangerous pass pawn. Black takes the knight and pushes. Pass pawns need to be pushed. e7, and now black plays d5. At the moment, the d6 pawn is under attack, so you might as well push it. This is a good move. Planning to go d4. Also, this knight is protecting this, so d5 is a great move. The pawn on e7 needs protection. Also, d4 is a threat, shutting out the bishop on e3, so Beth plays a great move here, bishop c5. Queen back to e8. Queen to f3, trying to come into the position. Queen to c6, so black has swung his queen from the king to the queen side. Now Beth protects the bishop with b4. This is such a good move. The bishop on c5 is perfectly placed. It's supported by a pawn on b4. It protects the e7 pawn, your asset. Meanwhile, the queen and rook can do something else. Queen e8. Black now offers a draw. In episode 2, we saw draw offers that were made when the opponent had losing positions. So offering a draw could be a psychological disadvantage. It's like you're telling your opponent, I don't really like my position. So you're forcing your opponent to look for a good continuation. A good way to play is just to not offer a draw. Just play out the position and see what happens. It's like you're seeking the truth of the position. No draw offers. Let's play until the end. Here, Beth refuses the draw and plays queen f5 check. King h8. And now pause the video. Can you find the winning move? How can white penetrate the black position? Using the asset on e7. I'll give you 5 seconds. The winning move is queen takes f6. Sacrificing your queen temporarily. Take, rook takes, and this is the point. Rook f8 check is now completely winning. Black now plays queen h5, trying to get rook e2 check in, or even queen e2 check, trying to create some counterplay. White plays rook f8 check, king g7, queen. Promoting. White is completely winning, but has a few checks to dodge. Rook e2 check, king f1. Gets out the way, attacking the rook. Meanwhile, white has 2 threats, rook g8 check, queen e7 check. It will be checkmate very soon. Here, there are no good checks for black. You can't play queen f3 check because of the rook on the f-file. Same thing here. Queen f5 check, you just lose your queen. So Borgov goes queen takes h3 check. But if you only have one queen, it might not be enough for you to save the game. King takes rook, queen g2 check. Bring the rook back to defend, as we see being played out in the episode. Queen e4 check, King d2. You can see Beth Harmon slowly sliding the queen to the left. And now she realizes, they both realize, there are no good checks for the black queen. Every red arrow is a possible check, and none of them are good. Meanwhile, white has threats. Get the rook in now, and he'll be checkmate very soon. So here, Borgov resigned. Beth Harmon beats the Russians. Beth Harmon wins the tournament. A nice moment, a bit of a weird moment, to be honest, because when you lose the final round game of a high-level tournament, the last thing I would ever want to do is hug my opponent. I would probably do something else to my opponent. Later, Beth phones Benny, lets them know of the good news, she won, and they're just going mad, celebrating for her, which is just a great moment. Such nice moments tend to happen in team events. When a player wins, not only are you winning for yourself, but you're winning for your team and you're collecting points. It creates this nice atmosphere, this nice team atmosphere. It's like friendships are created in this way. When someone scores a win, people celebrate with you on your win. And that's exactly what happened. So it's just such a nice scene when Benny picks up the phone and they all just start going mad, celebrating Harmon's win. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I know it's a long video, but I hope you felt it was a video worth watching. Let me know, what were your favourite moments of the Queen's Gambit? Comment below. If you enjoyed this video, then why not give it a like and subscribe to the channel at the same time. Make sure you hit that bell, then YouTube will let you know when I release another video. Thank you so much.